It's episode 2 of Analyzing Attitude, and this is the one that we were kind of most anticipating when we first started kicking around this idea. I'm Jimmie Allen. That is Mike Sweeney. We're your hosts of Analyzing Attitude. We're talking about Monday Night Raw on November 17th, 1997, is the infamous Double Rude episode where Ravishing Rick Rude appears with DX on Monday Night Raw, as well as making his debut for the NWO on Monday Nitro. And this one was pre-recorded again, another episode in Canada following the Montreal Screwjob. This is where we're going to get the infamous Brett Screwed Brett interview with Vince McMahon and the sit down with JimRoss, as well as some other stuff that unfolds. One thing we didn't talk about last week, Mike, is how this episode the week before had finished up, and that's with Ken Shamrock getting a pin over the WWF champion over Shawn Michaels, and that's how this episode opens of Monday Night Raw. We talked last week about how there was switching of commentators. This one, all show long, is JimRoss and Jim Cornette. We're going to get into that a little bit as well, and why there's some pretty glaring reasons why Jim Cornette didn't work out in Stanford and those show in this episode. But the show opens with what happened last week. Ken Shamrock, in a match against Triple H, knocks down the WWF champion Shawn Michaels, and Sergeant Slaughter slides into the ring and counts the WWF champion's shoulders to the mat, and setting up a Ken Shamrock as a legit contender for the WWF championship heading into In Your House Degeneration X.
Yeah, the way it ended last week was weird for the viewers at home.
For anybody, it was just a weird ending.
Yeah, they went in for, like, it was obvious disqualification or no contest, and they still went in for a pin. Lights went out at the end, and yeah, with this just strange roll up, Shawn wasn't even in the match. Maybe it was just kind of like
Sergeant Slaughter wasn't a guest referee or anything either.
It was bizarre. But yeah, I'm excited to talk about this episode because there, like you said, there's rude awakening a brewing. Yeah, and the Vince. I can't wait to talk about the Vince interview with JR about Brett.
And I have a plea, a beg, please, to the people who document these events, the Wikipedias of the world, or the different websites that give you a recap of what happened in these episodes. Please stop making them sound so boring. Right. There are so many great things that happened in this episode that I can absolutely not wait to break down.
Absolutely.
I want to touch on something you just said, though. You mentioned about how the main event last week ends in a no contest. 5 matches on this episode of Raw. 4 of them either ended no contest or disqualification. So kind of felt like the old Fed was running out of ideas to how to end matches, coming up with finishes.
And I was going to mention that later on, but there's no better point to bring it up now. No contest pretty much across the board on this episode. And
the one that does have a legit decision was probably the worst match of the night, by the way.
Yes.
But the WWF knows exactly where their bread is being buttered at this time, because they open it up with the Intercontinental Champion at the time, which is Stone Cold Steve Austin. He comes out to an absolute raucous reaction from the crowd in Canada, which is completely different from a year prior, right? And with his rivalry with BrettHart and how he was perceived at the time, and still very much a tweener. He's doing heelish things, but is probably the most over guy in the company right now from a reaction standpoint. Spoiler alert, that's not changing anytime soon. But Austin comes out, and we had this conversation last week. When does Dwayne Johnson, a.k.a. Rocky Maivia, officially become The Rock? And that starts in this episode.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I was going to say, he refers to himself a lot in his promos. And I was going to say, is like, if he wasn't officially The Rock in this episode, it's a sweet spot in between now and the Rumble, because he's got that plastered across his ass on his trunks, The Rock, by then. So
I did some research. This is officially the first time he refers to himself as that moniker. He hammers it home, and the commentators hammer it home. You can tell it's a Vince McMahonism. But before we get into that, let's talk about what happens. Stone Cold comes out, and he doesn't waste any time. Obviously, the challenge was issued by Rocky Maivia on the previous week of Raw, and he comes out and says, "Why do we got to wait to In Your House? Bring your ass out here right now." And I love that you could tell there was an issue with the truck, because he said, "Play some music so they know to walk out." These are things that just kind of happened back in that era. But he doesn't just get The Rock; he gets the entire Nation of Domination, and Rocky heads back through the curtain, sends Kamu Mustafa, Farouk, and D'Lo Brown. And you could tell who the young guy in the group is, because D'Lo goes into the ring and eats a stunner, which allows Rocky Maivia to come back down, and he runs off. It steals the Intercontinental Championship. We kind of set this up a little bit last week, but this is about to get really entertaining.
Oh, absolutely. And this is really our first like precursor to Rock and Austin.
Yeah.
As we talked about, which is top 3 legendary feuds across all wrestling. And yeah, just I like the way Stone Cold just was no nonsense, jumped on the announce table, said something to Jim Ross like, "Why did you that stupid look off your face?"
Slapped his hat off his head. Yeah. Mike, you keep setting yourself up for these, so I'm going to need you to be a little bit more thought-oriented when you make statements like this. You said top 3 rivalries all time. You made this comment about Kane's debut on the last episode, and I had to pick your brain on who else could have had a better debut. Give me your top 3 rivalries of all time if Rock Austin's not number 1.
I am super biased. So
okay.
We'll get the easy one out of the way. Austin McMahon.
Sure. Okay. All right. I'll hear that.
That's number 1 with a bullet. I'm biased. I like Sean Taker.
Okay.
But probably not even over Rock and Austin in that rivalry.
So those are your top 3? Rock Austin, Rock McMahon.
There's actually also Triple H and Foley.
And we're gonna get into a little bit of that tonight as well, because that's the main event tonight also. Mick Foley is Dude Love is versus The Rock, but there's a Triple H Mick Foley match coming down the pipe as well. That's going to be really interesting to break down with all the precursor of what's coming as well. But yeah, to your point, Austin, after this interaction, goes over, knocks off JR's headset, and kind of sets up what we've seen from him when he was injured after the Owen Hart incident, / what we see this character even continue to morph into as just expect chaos on this episode of Monday Night Raw, because Stone Cold Steve Austin's in the house. He smacks off JR's headset. And he goes, "I'm not going anywhere. I'll get my belt back." And Jim Cornette sets up the sit-down interview for Vince McMahon later in the show with the infamous Brett Screwed Brett comments. And Corny also lets us know that DX, including Rick Rude, is in the building at the moment he drops that line. Rick Rude is walking out on Nitro at the exact same time, because this episode of Monday Night Raw is being pre-recorded, and this is the seeds of Monday Night Raw going to a strictly live show.
Yeah, and they should, because of things like that. Now, I wouldn't think that they had like a tape handed to WCW that they knew when he was coming up, but the timing was perfect.
I guarantee you they did. There's no way. I don't believe in coincidences, and I guarantee you that they knew exactly when he was going to be on TV to time that up. But we go to a commercial break, and we come back to Jim Ross talking about DX, and Rick Rude is actually already in the ring to announce in Canada again, D-Generation X. And I forgot how much of a headache DX's entrance at this time could give you, with them walking into the ring, cut footage from something else, and it was like, if you have epilepsy, I highly recommend not watching this portion of this episode of Monday Night Raw. I did think it was funny. I started looking for the Easter eggs hidden in the imagery, though. They have the white Bronco chase from O.J. Simpson's arrest and some other stuff in there I thought was pretty cool. But Shawn Michaels gets in the ring and looks directly in the camera and says DX respects absolutely nobody, and this feels like the tension that was going on backstage with Shawn and his drug use, his alcohol use, and the problems with Vince McMahon at the time as well.
Yeah. He was definitely in, well, what would you call it? Like, everyone called Kurt Angle Perk Angle.
Yeah.
There's not really like a fun one for Shawn.
Prick Shawn?
Prick Shawn, yeah. That's the only thing I can think of.
But we're hammering this home that we don't care that BrettHart left WWF. We're going to make it look as bad as possible on him. Shawn gets in the ring and says, not only did I beat BrettHart, but I beat everybody in his family too. And it's kind of one of those things, we do this with heels in the business. You hate him for it, but he's not exactly wrong. He beat Owen, he beat Davey, he beat Jim Neidhart, and he beat BrettHart. And that's what the record book reflects. So we can go out there, we can say this. So WCW, BrettHart didn't want to drop the title and have that time-honored tradition of doing so, but we're going to kind of beat him on the way out anyway.
Yeah, he takes facts and adds them to his heel persona, or in that case, in at that time, just Sean being a prick.
Yeah. Just who Michael Hickenbottom was at that
right.
at that time as a person. And it's short into the sweet. Hey, let's bury Brett on the way out. And then Triple H calls out Sergeant Slaughter. I honestly forgot that this happened.
Yeah.
Spot on chin, by the way. This is, even though it's 1997 and Jerry Springer is running hot and Howard Stern is getting his start, there were some really risque comments said here by Triple H. He tells Sergeant Slaughter that his old lady isn't happy with his private parts, and Slaughter is having problems getting up past half mast in the bedroom. And he goes on to tell Sergeant Slaughter that Triple H is going to go to his house and show his wife what it looks like to have a soldier stand at attention. And I thought Sarge was great here because he kind of does I'm the commissioner, I'm the company man fake to go out of the ring and just absolutely throws what looked like a pretty good right hook Hunter's way. But obviously DX gets the upper hand. They end up leaving Sergeant Slaughter laying. What I thought was cool here, we kind of talked about the impact of Chyna last week. She lands a punch here, and Sarge sells it perfectly. But then obviously they put over Rick Rude's briefcase, which I imagine they planned on using later down the road, but that's clearly not going to
happen. Last time.
Yeah.
For sure. They really, and I don't know if it was like mirroring NWO because that was their friends at the time too, but they left like, after Triple H and Sarge went nose to chin, Triple H left, or they left an X mark with toilet paper where NWO had the spray.
That was definitely a we see on the other channel approach for sure.
Right. And yeah, Chyna laid it in thick.
Well, not even that, but like I thought it was incredible that Sarge sold it the way he did. Her punch specifically, but I mean he's such a veteran of the business that he just made it all. Even at his age and this state of his career, where he's been retired for so long, it still looked like the pedigree he took was $1 million.
Oh, right, yeah, it's about making talent at that point, especially when I know he's an on-screen character at the time, but was he a producer as well?
Yeah, he was an agent. Yeah, he was an agent at the time, gotcha. and then obviously the commissioner of the WWF at the time.
So yeah, the legendary status he has, he knows how to work, he knows how to get talent over, and he did all spades for me on that segment, and it sets up even more down the road for Triple H.
I was truly amazed with how good it looked. Like for a guy that was not an actor, like it looked as you could argue it was the best action in the ring that night.
Oh, you ain't gonna get any argument from me.
And this, and I don't even think it's close. And this is an episode that shows The Rock versus Mick Foley at the end of the at the end of the broadcast as well.
Who would have thought? Yeah, we know those matches that they are gonna have.
Yeah, there's so many seeds planted here of guys that we don't really know about yet, or aren't really sure how well they're gonna get over. That like in hindsight, it's like, oh, they were cooking with gas way before we thought they were.
That's what I was gonna say too. Like for our modern fans, Stone Cold's reaction, and he's not the top guy yet.
This is just his second Intercontinental title run,
but the reaction that he gets coming out, oh God, I feel like anything I'm going to say is just disrespectful to Steve. Yeah, but I really do mean it because we don't know about the younger crowd that watches. It's like the reaction that LA Knight gets now when he comes out.
Oh,
he's a mid-carder.
Yeah, I think it's even bigger than that.
Oh, for sure. For sure. But it's like, it's so cool to go back and see their ascension to the top, and like you couldn't argue. We gotta give it to Steve here soon.
Oh yeah, I mean obviously the seeds are planted for him to go on the run to Mania, but after this interaction with Sergeant Slaughter, they go directly to Brett Screwed Brett, the interview with Vince McMahon, where JimRoss sits down with Vince McMahon, and this is other people's accounts, not mine, but allegedly Vince McMahon thought he was going to sit down and people were going to see him as the babyface in this angle and thought he was going to come out smelling like roses. And I don't think Vince had the ability to see the forest through the trees and realize that people didn't necessarily believe this was a real competitive sport anymore at this point.
Right. And like,
Well, and it's kind of hard to not live in your bubble, right? He talks about the time. He says the time-honored tradition 14 times in this. Like, people know what the hell he's talking about. Like, he never says was supposed to drop the belt or go out a loser or anything like that. We know now with revisionist history what that means. But at the time, people went, "What time-honored tradition is he talking about?"
Right. Oh yeah, and I mean he is like he had the curtain call, but this is really just destroying kayfabe. But he tried to spin it in his own narrative
and tried
with the
making it
time-honored
kayfabe. And tried
tradition.
making it kayfabe. It's like, hey,
Right.
this isn't really real, but there's this real portion of it, and like, sure, there's some aspects of that that's true, but 99% of the people watching at home have no idea what the hell you're talking about.
Right. Absolutely. By the way, I was gonna say it would be kind of funny to see Jimmy Hart do that interview with him. Hey, baby,
Yeah.
why'd you screw Brett?
I don't know if anybody in wrestling irritates me more than Jimmy Hart, by the way.
Looks good for 81, by the way.
That's a good point. Let's jump right into it though, because I thought it was really interesting that they opened the interview. I forgot this, and obviously we didn't have access to it at the time, but they open it with Bret Hart's On the Line interview, which is a sports radio or sports TV show in Canada that he ends up going on. Vince McMahon ends up on it a couple times. Kurt Angle, several WWF superstars end up going on this show in later times, but this was really the first time that is shown on American television. And Bret Hart openly talks about, hey, I've given my 30. This is before the Montreal Screwjob. I've given my 30-day notice to the WWF, and I'm debating between WCW or the WWF, but I'm heavily leaning one direction. And they put that on TV. And I don't think, and listen, in 1997 I was 9 years old, so I don't think quite could put the grasp on it at the time. But that was such a peel behind the curtain, and I think people in the know were like, "Oh, this will get the reaction," but I don't think that most people across the United States probably went, "What is that television show, and why would they even allow him to show that?"
I honestly, because I had my own thoughts about it, because that, and he even talks about the contract, like the specifics of the money that Brett was going to get.
JimRoss, you mean? Yeah.
Well, Vince even says he's like, I wanted to work with him on this and yada yada yada, and we offered him a $20 million contract over 10 years, but he'll get $3 million per year for appearance. And I was wondering if he was just trying to, I don't know what he was trying to pull.
Look at all this money he's getting. I'm not a bad guy.
Like, sure, trying to shit on him.
Yeah, and Vince opened and said, I truly believe that Bret Hart screwed Bret Hart. And JimRoss asked why, and he said Bret Hart screwed Bret Hart. And if Vince feels responsible for any of the decisions he made, and I think this is probably why Vince thought he was going to be the bad guy, and I think this gets lost in translation because of what Mr. McMahon becomes. He goes, I take responsibility for all the decisions I made. I'm not above saying sorry for making bad decisions. He goes into the discussion of the time-honored tradition and respecting of the company that made him a star, and Brett didn't want to honor that. And again, we know that's all true now, but in the time, you're like, how?
Right.
He lost, like, he didn't lose, and you made him lose.
Right.
And he says that was Brett's decision. But on the surface, you're presenting this as a real contest, and all anybody knows is you rang the bell without him quitting.
Right.
So,
and Brett didn't want to leave.
And to your point, JimRoss then goes on to ask about the 20-year contract, which at this point Brett would only be in year 2 of, and Vince was very open and honest about this, which I give him credit for today. He said, Jim asked, did Brett want to leave or did you want him to leave? And we know that Vince helped broker the deal for him to go to WCW, and he mentions in this interview it was a joint decision. Right. And you could tell that he didn't want to be a bad guy at this point, because if he did, he'd have said, I told him to leave. This was my decision. Told him to get the hell out of my company. But he doesn't go that route. And Brett talked openly after this about how he looked at Vince McMahon as a father figure. And this is the part that probably had to hurt the most. Vince said, I was disappointed in Bret Hart. And he's sporting that black eye that the camera conveniently zooms in on at this point, and says that Brett did hit him. And Vince reminds us that he's 52 at this point, which reminds me, Vince McMahon is going to be 80 this year. And, yes. and for anybody that wants to put that in perspective of where we are now. And what I thought was interesting is JimRoss asked Vince, did you think about pursuing legal action against Bret Hart for the assault? And he goes, I did, but I'm not going to. And like, if you were gonna leave it out there, you probably should have said, we're working on that, or something like that. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because it would have garnered intrigue, which goes into the last question. And JimRoss goes, if you were just a storyteller, which is ironic because that's all truly Vince McMahon was at this point, how would you have hoped Bret Hart's story would have ended? And he said, I would have hoped that it would have been a dramatic one. I don't know how it could have been more dramatic than what happened in Montreal, but he said that it would have been one that gave him dignity and would have shown people that he was a true champion, and could have truly been looked at as one of the greatest, if not the greatest champion of all time. I have no sympathy for Bret, none. I have no sympathy for someone who wouldn't do the right things for the fans, the wrestlers, and the company who made him. Bret screwed Bret. And that's the last image that we're left with.
Yeah. One, there's no way
Yeah,
he could come out as the sympathetic billionaire. Think of the billionaire.
honestly, like, if this happens in 2025, he's 100% right. He would have been looked at as the good guy because everybody would have said, screw him. But this is the first time this had happened on a national level. Like, there were two other screw jobs in wrestling history. Obviously, everybody knows about the Wendy Richter one,
Yes.
but that didn't get talked about. It happened one other time in Memphis that wasn't on national TV. So this is really for the first time, specifically our generation, that anybody's seeing anything even relatively close to this or getting this big of a peek behind the curtain.
Yeah, and even the Wendy Richter one, like, for the time, people really didn't know. This one was on pay-per-view.
And sorry, Wendy, or care.
Right. We wish you all the luck, Wendy.
Yeah.
There's a couple things about the interview that I thought were pretty cool. Before the interview, even Wrestling with Shadows, like,
Sure.
that's like the timing of that is just nuts. And like, there's some awesome snippets out there. You guys can look it up for yourself. I'm pretty sure it's still on YouTube everywhere. I love Bret recanting the story of punching Vince.
It tells it every chance he gets to this day, by the way.
He just landed back like a starfish.
Yeah. Knocked
Brett,
him out.
by the way,
punch.
I think is the best interviewer post-career.
He's just because he's so bitter about everything.
And it's just, it's funny, but it's unintentionally funny.
You think he likes Bill Goldberg?
Bill Goldberg. I was just telling Angie, I was like, do you know Bill Goldberg? Oh, I know Goldberg. He's like, no. It's Bill Goldberg.
Bill Goldberg, yeah. Good.
And then they, do you think Vince pushed him out because of the hatred with Shawn, and Shawn to him was his golden goose?
No, I think it was a money issue, because you got to remember, at this time there's like legitimately water coolers being taken out of Titan Towers. They're canceling dates because they can't afford travel. They can't afford to move the ring, and he just looked at the biggest money cut that he could make, and it makes sense, from just trying to save funding. And it would be a really awkward moment for Bret Hart to take the negotiation of a lower price as the champion, the top guy, and then be able to face the locker room and say, hey, sorry, I had to take less money, so now you guys can't refuse to take a pay cut too.
Right.
And that would have just generated so much awkwardness. And I know Bret didn't want to leave, but for probably Bret's mental health, if this wouldn't have happened, it's probably the best thing that could have happened for him.
In retrospect's a hell of a thing, because we all know, like, the screw job was basically the start of just a string of just shitty things happening to him,
right?
Over the course of the next few years. And do you think WCW fumbled them? Because I sure do. I know he broke his knuckle, punching Vince, but referee.
It's such a double-edged sword, right? Because did they fumble him, or is Eric Bischoff kind of right that the Bret Hart that walked into WCW, was he a broken man, a former shell of himself, because of the way the screw job happened? And and again, this is also post his career, post the Goldberg injury, post his stroke, where he's bitter about all these things. But I mean, not to keep beating a man while he's down, but like, I also wonder how much Owen's death really affected him in WCW as well, too. And obviously there's some fumbles before that, but I don't know, man. WCW screwed up enough things that it's easy to just point at them and say they clearly did, because that's the low hanging fruit.
Right.
But like, so much stuff happened in his life that I don't know how great I would have been if I were in his shoes either. You know,
Oh, I probably would have quit.
a little surprised he didn't, right? But maybe the money was just in a situation where he couldn't.
Yeah.
Let's jump back into the show, because up next we get Mark Marrow versus Jerry Lawler, and they bring up the altercation. We talked about this last week, and they're pushing Mark Marrow and Butterbean. Butterbean's back in the crowd. I tried finding confirmation of this. Sable is sporting a black eye when she comes out with Mark Marrow, and they allege that it's because she got kicked in the face by her horse. But then they mention later in the show that, we hope our fans in attendance understand that Mark Marrow didn't hit Sable. So I don't know if she actually got kicked by her horse or if they were actually trying to push the narrative at this point of the domestic violence angle. And it kind of feels like the latter.
That's exactly what I thought. I mean, granted, he's a former Golden Gloves boxer, so you would think it would be more of a welt, but
right.
But I think that we're definitely planting the seeds of domestic abuse as we see going forward with their storyline.
In through the middle of this match, and which is weird, is because Jerry Lawler finished the last hour of Raw last week on commentary, but he's in action here. And Jim Cornette has the line of the night where we've heard him talk about how much he despised Sable and Sonny in shoot interviews, but he said he asked Sable one time how old she was, and she showed him how many teeth she had in response, which is funny, but it doesn't make any sense because it pans to her smiling and she has all of her teeth. So there's that. One thing I didn't remember was I remembered them pushing the narrative that Brian Christopher was not Jerry Lawler's son. Like, I remember that being a thing, but I never remembered this moment where he comes out and is supporting Jerry Lawler in the ring. They're obviously father and son in real life.
Right. And we jumped into it, like the storyline happened before we started this podcast and like what we're covering.
Yeah.
So it seems kind of out of place, but it is something that they were following up on because Mark Marrow did defeat Brian Christopher. Yeah, they were kind of loose with what they wanted to tell you, but then they would go right into like we were talking about with, okay, it's obvious that's his son.
Yeah, we don't want to talk about this, but here it is.
All right.
It's a very weird approach.
And also, I didn't care for, like, I guess I got the outcome of the match, but I was like, Marrow was maybe a rising star.
He was supposed to be planned to face Austin in 2 weeks.
Yeah, and that's why I was like, have him lose to Jerry. I mean, he did get his heat back at the end after the match, but
yeah, so
strange.
This weird thing happens in the middle of the match where they basically like turn it into a boxing match. Jerry Lawler's doing the Ali footsteps in the ring, and then Mark Marrow gets him up to do the rope-a-dope, and then Jerry Lawler gives him the okey-doke out of the ring, and Brian Christopher jumps him on the outside, which leads to Sable getting in the ring and pulling Jerry Lawler all off Mark Marrow with her whip, which that's a sentence in its own right. And then Mark Marrow gets DQ'd, but hits, to your point, he hits the TKO on Jerry Lawler to kind of be standing tall at the end, and then he gets in Sable's face and has the altercation where he basically blames her for losing the match, blah, 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 blah. All to cut over to Butterbean in the audience to further Mark Marrow versus Butterbean for some reason.
What was his deal? Like, he's not even from that area in Canada.
Yeah. It was an interesting choice. We'll just put it at that.
And I'm not going to say it now. It's the segment later when they go back to them. I have another wardrobe conversation with Butterbean.
Go ahead here, because we'll just cover all of Butterbean right now. We don't even need to go into the stuff that happened later.
Zumbas.
Yeah,
Do you remember
this is the 90s, man. They were all. There's a couple of pictures of peak 90s Undertaker and Zubas, by the way, which that's a sight to see as well. Up next, we get the announcement that Jeff Jarrett is going to make his debut next week, and it's interesting, man. Like, they were setting him up as this big deal, and we know that like he ends up holding Vince up for money at some point too.
Yeah, and there was the talk of having a title program with Austin down the line.
Yep.
And
I'd have to the ring and stunned him. We'll talk about that eventually too.
I'd have to rewatch because he did a podcast with Austin talking about why it didn't happen. Austin said there was no heat, but it seemed like there was. But
well, yeah, a lot of people feel like it stemmed to the way that Austin was used by Jerry Jarrett back when in his time working for the Jarretts in the Tennessee area. I saw this come up. What happens next on basically the synopsis of this episode? We get a 6-man little person 6-man tag, and Sonny is the guest referee. My knee-jerk reaction was, why is this still a thing in 1997? But I remembered what actually happens, and this is legit low-key one of my favorite things I've ever seen happen in wrestling, because we get to a point in the 6-man tag where the wrestlers are running the ropes and Sonny's doing leapfrogs. Sonny stops Max Mini, and the lights.
I praise you for getting those names right.
the lights go out and Kane's music hits. You have 6 little people and Sonny in the ring, and WWE's version of Michael Myers is walking out. He choke slams 2 of the wrestlers. These are trained professionals, not Sonny. We didn't get that, which would have been Listen, I'm not here for men on women's violence, but this was a thing that was happening in the 90s. And I think if you wanted the best reaction, Sonny at the time was a trained pro wrestler. I think that's where they should have went with this. I think he should have chokeslammed or tombstone Sonny, because that would have got the biggest reaction.
She probably would have been all for it too.
Exactly. And instead, for no apparent reason, we send the headbangers out to stop Kane. And obviously it was clearly to get let's smash the boombox over his head to get the reaction out of it. But we're also burying 2 guys for no reason. I hated what actually happened here.
Yeah, I mean, and you would think with all the people out there, it would have been more destructive with him out there.
Yeah.
And it was already a short match, but
was that a pun?
It was a pun. I'm being punny today, just a little punny.
Yeah.
And the only thing I mean, the randomness of the headbangers is one thing, but I do like the smashing of the boombox, and Kane no-sold it because they're trying to build him as that, like we talked about, that Michael Myers character. Yeah. Very pointless segment, other than just trying to show Kane as a destructive beast. I thought it was going into his feud with Taker. I
thought it was hilarious, though, man. The like, if you're gonna do this, I don't know what else you could have done to make that segment actually work.
Yeah,
it was fantastic. You good with just skipping over what happens in the light heavyweight tournament?
I just had one question. Is Eric Shelley related to Alex Shelley?
I don't believe so. But Scotty, don't call me too hotty. Taylor gets the win and advances in a tournament that nobody cares about. All right, moving on.
Yeah.
We come back to Sergeant Slaughter in the ring, and listen, this might be a segment we need to give, maybe the champion night or MVP, Slammy of the night, maybe. I think Sarge was the MVP of this episode, man. He was fantastic. He comes back out after being laid out by DX and calls out Triple H, and we'll get into what Jim Cornette thinks about Sergeant Slaughter in the main event in a minute. But for a guy that had no business being this over in 1997, I thought he did a great job.
I don't think he was that over in the 90s, or I mean the
80s. Yeah.
Sure. But just that, I will say, whatever suits he was wearing,
they were a decision, that's for sure.
But I digress. I can't remember if it was this episode or the last, but the Hunter Green stuff he was wearing looked way better than what the Truth Commission was wearing,
which was somehow the same color. Yeah.
But yeah, I think Sarge did more than anybody did for Triple H at that point, and he.
Without question.
Ultimate Warrior. I mean, Ultimate Warrior squashed him, but
yeah,
the whole in there with a big guy thing. But yeah, I was all for it.
We get the New Age Outlaws, Billy Gunn and Road Dogg, taking on the Los Boricuas in a 44 seconds no contest match. Thoughts on this?
What was Savio Vega's partner's name? We don't know.
Los Boricua number 2.
There we go. No thoughts. Really.
Yeah.
They're not even in the New Age Outlaws yet, right?
Correct. They're just still Billy Gunn and Road Dogg. Yeah.
We'll get into them more as the episodes go.
They were so focused and shown the week before in the handicap match with Blackjack Bradshaw, and they just do this here, and I just thought it was a squandering of obviously two guys that we learn are super talented, but you kind of see why they're in the position they're in. Like they just at this point still don't really know how to use these guys.
No, and like the no contest really shouldn't have. It should have been a DQ in the favor of the Outlaws. But
Yeah,
no, I agree. I think it was just let's get them on TV.
Yeah, it's a nothingness for nothingness sake, and I forgot who. I didn't even wrote down who actually won by DQ because I don't think anybody wins in those situations.
Right.
Then we come back, and it's our this is the main. No, yeah, this is the main event, right? So we come back to the main event of the night, which is Dude Love and his Mick Foley and his Dude Love persona taking on then Rocky Maivia, recently appointed The Rock. And if Sarge wins the MVP of the night, I thought The Rock was definitely runner up. His promo that he cut, where keep in mind at the beginning of the show, as we talked about, he steals the Intercontinental Championship from Stone Cold Steve Austin. He comes out and lets everybody know that this match with Dude Love is a non-title contest, by the way. It kept referring to himself as The Rock, but after the promo, they start kind of as Dude Love's coming out, they start talking about the pay-per-view, and I mentioned this a minute ago, but we kind of get a look into why Jim Cornette doesn't work out in Stanford, right? They start talking about Sergeant Slaughter, and he starts talking about how over Sarge was in the Carolinas in the 80s.
Yes.
I don't know if anybody's doing their math at home, but that means that Sergeant Slaughter wasn't working for the WWF at the time, and Vince McMahon is a very, 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 very petty person.
Yes.
So it just the wrong place, wrong time. Cornette, read the room.
What did you think of Cornette on commentary? By the way, this is stupid, but I just thought it was interesting that Cornette was on commentary and they were in Cornwall, Ontario.
Correct. Yes. Which seems like something Vince McMahon would do just to be punny himself.
Right.
But the one thing I like almost never remembered this happening, that happens in the show, that happens a ton in today. They go to commercial break live in action during this match, and I don't remember that ever happening in the 90s, but it happens in the main event here while Dude Love's dropping an elbow.
See, I remembered a lot in WCW because at the time I was watching, and it was WCW that I was watching. So this is actually really fun because I saw most of the Attitude Era, but
yeah,
going back and watching, it's just always been something that I just hate. I fucking hate commercials. But
it's not even commercials, but it's like you never see Patrick Mahomes drop back for a pass, throw it downfield, and then you get a Geico ad. that just never happens. So it's as somebody that's trying to disbelief or suspend belief and be in the moment, because obviously belief goes out of the window as soon as somebody Irish whips somebody. But right. It's just one of those things that are super unnecessary. But this is still, we talked about it last week, the clunkiness of Kevin Dunn in the truck trying to get it figured out while doing live TV, and at this time obviously pre-recorded, that they're missing commercial breaks, they're not really hitting their cues and things of that nature, that in a match between Mick Foley and Dwayne Johnson, we're going to commercial break in the middle of the action.
Yeah, they clearly weren't the stars they were then, apparently, even in their eyes. But we all know it now. Babyface throws them over the top, high spot, commercial break. Doing it when they did it.
Rinse and repeat.
Yeah. Just bad Kevin Dunn. I'm glad he's gone.
What do you what did you think of the Dude Love character?
I was going to ask you that. I thought it was fun. Clearly not as iconic as his other two, or even just himself.
You know what? That's the other thing I didn't bring up. Jim Cornette refers to Mick Foley as Cactus Jack during this match as well, which is the main reason Vince McMahon did not want to hire Mick Foley, and Jim Ross talked him into it as well. So just another notch in the belt for why Jim Cornette exited Stanford, Connecticut.
And Vince is the reason Dude Love is on TV. He saw those
home videos,
those homemade tapes, that he made. And I thought it was fun, and it was, to me, perfectly timed, like the amount of usage for him, because there's only so much you can do with that, especially with how hardcore Mick Foley is.
Sure. And listen, these two guys are going to give us Sunday or the empty arena match on Halftime Heat and Rock's 900 chair shots of doom later down the road, and we're definitely going to have to unpack that at a later time. But the way this episode goes, it's kind of pretty evident what's going to happen here. Mick Foley, Dude Love, tunes up the band for sweet shin music, which I love, by the way.
Yes.
And then you know what's going to happen. The Nation jumps in the ring. The one thing I'll say about this is, like, it was pretty obvious what was going to happen anyway with those other three guys being out there, and knowing that Steve Austin's giving the "I'm still in the building, I'm still in the building, I'm still in the building," and the commentators hammering that home all night long, including in this matchup. I felt like it just took way too long to get, because you're clearly trying to spotlight Austin, right?
Right.
I just thought it took way too long to get to him and to get his controlled chaos at the end of the show.
Yeah, it wasn't even that long of a match, but
4 minutes 55 seconds.
But it was like
about a minute. It was about 3 minutes and 55 seconds too long.
Right? It's teasing too much, and yeah, just get him out there. And D'Lo with
takes another stunner.
Yeah. Wait, is that why he does the? I can't do it. That hurts my neck.
We need you to do that every episode. We mentioned D'Lo Brown from here on out.
We'll start it off. Welcome to Analyzing Attitude.
Yeah. Speaking of which, don't forget to like and subscribe and give us a hell yeah YouTube as well. What we don't see at home is this actually leads to a live event dark match with Ahmed Johnson, Steve Austin, and The Undertaker, with Vader taking on the Nation of Domination in an 8-man tag. Faces go over. Everybody gets a happy ending on the way out of Canada. All right, that gives us the night, a show that, when looking at it on paper, didn't have a whole lot of meat and potatoes to it. We didn't really have a potato of the night. Maybe it was Rick Rude's briefcase to Sergeant Slaughter's face, because that definitely left a mark.
or the company potato for him jumping ship live on their television.
Fair enough. Yeah, Rick Rude threw a bunch of potatoes in this episode. I gave this show a B+. I thought it was really, really good. Again, we mentioned Sergeant Slaughter absolutely steals the show and is incredibly entertaining throughout all this. Underrated as the WWF commissioner, in my opinion. He's going to get back into the ring, and we're going to see him take on Triple H. Took that amazing pedigree. We get two fantastic promos from The Rock. We get a really, really good Stone Cold Steve Austin promo open up the show. And it is DX being DX. So I think it's a B+.
I am actually with you on B+. That's what I have down. Not much in-ring wise, match quality and everything, but the promos, the historical factors that are in this episode.
And we know what it's ramping up to, right? I mean, the chase of Rocky stealing Stone Cold's IC belt is on. Next week is going to be a really, really good one. We didn't really talk much about Rick Rude being on the other channel tonight, and I want to dive into that really quickly, just because the reason he's over there is he considers BrettHart family, and he made the jump because, and we talked about this last week. Mick Foley was not on last week's Raw because he was at home. Mick comes back, Rick leaves.
Yes, I understand it, and Rick couldn't wrestle at the time, so why not go take that bigger paycheck with people that you care about and not stick with the people you don't trust.
Yeah, and honestly, how else could you made a bigger impact as a non-in-ring performer? I don't think you could have.
I bet Rick, hand over fist, talked to Bischoff and said, "I already taped. Can you imagine the history or the impact we'll make doing me on two different shows?" And
listen, this is 28 years later. It's the highlight of this podcast tonight, right? I mean, it had that big of an impact because you had a moment where you had one guy showing up on two different spots live on television, and that didn't happen ever back then, especially in competing wrestling companies.
No, and there was two things I wanted to just quickly gloss over. What was your favorite Rick Rude match? Because he does not wrestle here on out.
Ooh, great. Probably the Ultimate Warrior match, just because of the infamous tights with the Intercontinental Championship on his crotch. So that's got to be number one just for that reason. Him versus Sting in WCW is really underrated too. They put on some really, really good matches, but I don't know about you. I didn't have a whole lot of access to WCW before Monday Night Raw. So I didn't get to see a lot of that stuff till later in life.
Mine's archives, and that Sting one, it should be up there. He fucking broke his back on that one.
Yeah.
I like the Warrior one in the cage, and the trunks. My favorite was having Jake Roberts' wife on there,
which only like 6 people would have known about until they said it on camera. But obviously a guy that was really influential to the business. That whole Minnesota crew with him, Kurt Hennig, whoever. Like obviously Sean Waltman will later fall into that equation, but and Shawn Michaels for some degree, Marty Jannetty for a little while too. But that whole crew kind of ran wrestling for a little while.
Oh yeah, 100%. And just wanted to give congratulations to JimRoss. He tweeted out today his surgery went well, and he's once again the voice of what we're talking about. So
go give JR's barbecue some BBQ some love on Twitter, and like you need us on this podcast telling you what JimRoss
absolutely
Twitter handle is. I'm sure you all follow him, but give him some love and support. Those guys truly love that. And as I said last week, I mean, I met JimRoss twice live in person, and is nothing but an absolute class act when you get the chance to meet him and appreciates his fans. So JR, Analyze Attitude's rooting for you here. Again, if you are watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. It means a lot to the channel. Give us an oh hell yeah in the comments, and we will see you next week as we review Monday Night Raw. It is the November 24th episode. We'll have more for it on you next week. Thanks for following us here on Analyze the Attitude. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Do your best D'Lo Brown impersonation. Follow us on all of our social medias. We'll see you next week.